I have to wait for this thing. There we go. Populating on YouTube so I can mute myself so that I can police my chat for any ignorance that may want to come into this live stream and flex their ignorant emotions. We'll just go ahead and get rid of you real quick so that our conversation can be for the productive people who have something meaningful to say and not something mean to say because they got the devil in them. So I'm on a little bit early, so I'm just gonna let the live stream cycle a little bit because YouTube, I don't know. I watch my live streams on a replay and I'm like, wow, why do they look so grainy? I don't, it just irritates me so much. You said you feel productive. Hello, Howard. How are you? How are you, my friend? It's so good to see you. Hopefully, you like the conversation that we talked about today. I always say that I don't have a political dog in any fight, right? So if people come over to this channel looking for somebody to be in a herd of mentality, just like them, you're at the wrong channel. You can check out. It's not going to happen over here. I'm glad you are well, my friend. How is your wife? I hope she is well as well, that both of you are blessed and highly favored. The first blessing of the day is waking up. It's always good to wake up on the other side of the grass. But, anyways, you guys, I was getting ready to go to bed last night, and my sister called me, and she's like, they fired Jimmy Kimmel. And I'm like, they did? And she said, yeah, they let him go. I think he said some comments about Charlie Kirk, and his network let him go. And so I'm like, I just did a video on some of these individuals who were celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk, how a lot of the companies that they were working with had decided to let them go, to fire them. So I'm like, wow, it continues, right? Now you have Jimmy Kimmel being obviously let go because he had made some comments about, Charlie Kirk. And so now I'm sitting up here like, now people are getting fired for their opinions about, someone that they did not agree with. They're getting fired. They're losing their jobs because they are expressing their opinions about this individual. And I think that it is fair to kind of narrow down some people. Are they celebrating that he got assassinated in that manner, that he died in that manner? Or are they celebrating the fact that he doesn't exist anymore to be able to spew whatever rhetoric that irritated their souls? Um, that obviously is always open to interpretation with people in societies, and that's just what it is. Peace and love. You said for Charlie, he was the best of us. That is a matter of opinion, James. That is a matter of opinion, right? But I think it's interesting, though, that we kind of live in this double standard world. Because I remember in 2020, there were a lot of conservatives who were getting let go from their jobs because they did not agree with trans ideology. Maybe they did not have the scruples to articulate their opinions about that ideology on social media. But whatever the case is, they were doxxed. Someone reached out to their employers and they were let go from their jobs, right? Now, fast forward, right? And now the pendulum has swung, right? As they always say. And now we have the conservatives feel empowered, right? You know, and now with their empowerment, they're like, we can do the same thing that the liberals did. Basically, we can do the same things that the liberals do. And so they're doing that. And so when I tell people that there is no side to be on, truly there isn't, because these parties, they operate the same. They just really do. You know, And if you're on a political side, to me, you're just a lemming, and I feel bad for you. But off of that, the Charlie Kirk assassination, it has gotten people just, it's just a lot of wild stuff is coming up after this. Like, this isn't some cut and dry assassination. They caught the radicalized young guy who, had this motive for wanting to kill him. No, it's not that cut and dry. At least that's not what Candace Owens is wanting people to believe, because ever since Charlie has passed away, Candace has been a relative vigilante, in trying to find justice for Charlie. She has been pulling out a lot of receipts. Her timeline is important, guys. Like, if Candace Owens is not rocking with the timeline is off, okay? The timeline is just off. This girl is obsessed with her timeline. And she said something to the effect, what did she say? Because Candace is emotional. And again, I always say that, when something traumatic or tragic happens to people, obviously we all took a psychology class or two in our lives where, people go through those processes of grieving, right? And I think that, Candace went from grieving to being very, very angry. And she was very, very angry because she didn't feel like, what was being presented as the root cause of this man being killed is the truth. And again, you see, I say that Candace loves to put a lot of stuff on Israel, right? And that is the narrative that Candace is going with right now, is that Israel had something to do with the 86ing of Charlie Kirk. And again, allegedly, right? And again, nobody's going to ever know that for sure, right? Because obviously, if people are that coordinated to hijack a young dude, have a decal for him, and just basically set them up to be the faces of this murder, meanwhile, somebody way more professional and sophisticated was really the gunman, as I feel like Candace is alluding to here, right? But this is my let's run with Candace Owens' theory for a second here. And this is going to probably not sit well with certain conservatives, right? But I'm not here to sit well with you, right? I'm just here to speak realities as it relates to patterns that I see. But I think the sad reality, that Candace Owens, has to, number one, come to terms with is that her good friend Charlie Kirk, you know, who has always been, from what people say, very, very pro Israel, right? It was his pro Israel stance, right, that got him some really in bed with a lot of big donors, okay? And when I think about, donors, I think about them as stakeholders and companies, really, right? Because if you're a nonprofit, your donors are your lifeline, right? If the donors go away, the nonprofit goes away, right? So I think being a young, ambitious person, starting Turning Point USA, getting the traction, putting in the work that he did, right? Charlie Kirk was naturally going to attract people who liked, who could leverage an organization like Turning Point USA. Once you get to the point where you're getting large amounts of people, you're attracting them to come to your events. Those Turning Point USA events, were not small. Yes, they were on college campuses, but sometimes I've done events on college campuses. Turnout is like a crapshoot sometimes, depending on what the event is. Those Turning Point events on those college campuses were huge in a lot of states. And so I say that to say that Charlie Kirk, I think that he became a lot bigger than what maybe he was ready to really become. And when you become bigger than what you're ready to become, you don't realize that there's rules at the top. All right? There are rules at the top. And this goes for any nonprofit, right? If you're a grassroots organization and you're able to make it by yourself without all these huge big class donors, which a lot of people want, but sometimes these some of these donors are not what you want, because really they're silent hostile takeover type of people, and really they're giving you money to be able to buy your ideology, buy your platform. And so, I think the sad reality for people like Candace Owens, who were friends with Charlie Kirk, is he was taking money from Israel. Charlie Kirk was totally taking money from Israel. And I'm pretty sure in the beginning, as he was really getting traction, especially when it came to the political campaigning, he definitely became more attractive. But I'm not sure if Charlie knew really what it meant to take money from some of these donors, right? It meant that he was going to eventually have to start placating into their narratives and their propagandas. Otherwise, it's like they'll feel like they own you and they'll start pulling funding from your nonprofit, right? So Candace is pulling out a lot of receipts, and I'm just kind of reading in between the lines of a lot of this. And I'm like, your friend got in bed with some donors that eventually were going to try to own him and get his platform to sell out to ideas that maybe didn't resonate to where he was evolving into thinking. And here's the thing: Charlie Kirk was 31 years old. I would have expected, if Charlie Kirk lived, right, and Charlie Kirk made it to 40, he would have been even more, his mindset about things would have been evolved even more. I don't know anybody who is truly intelligent and who is truly living this game called life, who is existing just every day without learning and evolving in your mindset about something, right? We're living life, we're getting greater understanding, and I'm pretty sure if we're to buy this narrative that Candace is on right now, that I would assume that Charlie Kirk at some point changed his position, his viewpoints on certain matters. And so because I keep, that reoccurring thing that kept happening when he died, right? I kept hearing the conservative base. They kept echo chambering the same damn words. He died because of his views. He died because of his beliefs. But they were saying it in connection to, him having an opposing view from this liberal populace. But I read in between the lines based off of what Candace is saying. And it sounds like Candace is saying, yeah, he did die because of his views, changing his views. So as opposed to him being pro-Israel, Charlie started challenging the U.S.-Israel relations. And really, when you are a voice and you have influence, you're not supposed to do that. Okay? That is a no-no. People may not like it, but it's a no-no. And, I think that Charlie Kirk, he probably, if I could imagine Charlie's mindset, because allegedly, and Nick Fuentes is saying this, Candace Owens pull out her receipts, right? Allegedly, right, Charlie Kirk was offered $150 million. He was offered $150 million. And supposedly, allegedly, this was from Israel propaganda machines. And Charlie declined that money. And according to Candace, after he declined that money, he was invited to go to Israel. And according to Candace, this could have been a re-education camp, or it could have been a shakedown, that like either you play ball or you don't, right? And so it's a lot of interesting side chick stories that are coming out, that to me diverts my attention away from Tyler Robinson, because a lot of people are saying the succession of what was going on with Tyler Robinson didn't really make any sense, Why didn't the FBI detain Tyler Robinson's, male to female lover? Why didn't they detain him, especially if they, you know, didn't raid the house yet? Why wouldn't you detain him for at least 24 hours? So Candace is really on an emotional investigation, right? The Macrons should be very happy because the death of Charlie Kirk has distracted Candace from talking about, Emmanuel Macron's wife and the possibility that she may have cock and balls. Like that is totally off the radar right now, right? Off of Candace's radar. So France should be, kind of celebrating not being on Candace Owens's radar, if anything. But anyways, you guys, you said that Candace is making a power move. I will say this: it does give power move because here's the thing. Um, I don't know if I was real close to somebody, and I know that these people live and breathe being on the internet, right? Um, but if I was real close to somebody, I would really want to give myself a chance to grieve, and even if I had suspicions or doubt, I would allow that man to be buried before I start, really going into the Nancy Drew super sloop thing. And the one thing about Candace, and other people may have their opinions about this, is I'm not saying that what she is doing is wrong. She was his friend. I'm just saying the timing in which she's doing everything to me is wrong. The man just, I mean, he wasn't even really buried before, Candace really started going in on these suspicions, and all of these things were happening to Charlie. These things were happening to Charlie. It's like, his wife haven't had time to process and grieve. You know what I mean? The world is still kind of, the people who followed Charlie Kirk, right? They're still having to process and grieve, this incident. And so with all this like conspiracy theory stuff, and I'm not saying that she's wrong, she could be spot on. I think that, like I said, I haven't agreed with a lot of things that her methods, her methodologies. I've not agreed with Candace Owens' methodologies always in terms of how she got her coins, right, and how she gets her relevance, right. But I'm not gonna say that, some of the things that Candace Owens, investigate, she's a way better investigator than your average news outlet. And, Candace, she's very emotional. And so Candace has this ability to really suck you into some bullshit, and you didn't even want to be sucked into that bullshit. It's like, damn, her little receipt book, it's like, dangling some shit in your eyes and stuff, and she just keeps you watching. So she's a way better investigator than a lot of these news outlets. And, I have to give Candace her flowers on that side. I just think that Candace should have waited. She should have waited until the man was at least buried before she allowed her emotions to really just start putting all this stuff out there. Because, with all the conspiracy stuff, it does distract from the grieving process, right? Sometimes you got to let the dead rest before you just start going on all this conspiracy stuff. And maybe I'm wrong in thinking that, but I really do think that this is too soon. And apparently, Charlie's pastor did not really care for Candace Owens going on this super sloop investigation so soon after he died, too. So let's listen to Candace because she's going off on his pastor now. Candace is emotional, y'all.
I'm not going to let it go, okay? You're not going to emotionally use some jujitsu, and I'm referring here to Roy or Rob McCoy, who says, I'm Charlie's pastor, and here's the truth, or whatever it is, to look the other way right now, okay? You're not going to tell me that I have to feel too bad to investigate who shot my friend in front of my face. So stop the nonsense. This is what Charlie's pastor passed around to all of the people that were intimidating Charlie leading up to his death. It's funny that Charlie's pastor couldn't find his voice when Bibi Netanyahu was lying about Charlie. Here's pastor, you know what he's saying is are lies. No, he didn't find his voice saying anything about Bibi Netanyahu. Candace investigating things? Yeah, that's got to stop.
Here's what. And I'll be real. I mean, it's easy to blame Bibi Netanyahu. You know, obviously she's running on circumstantial situations, but you know, honestly, why aren't you blaming your internal parties? You know, your internal MAGA people. And I hate to. I mean, since she's playing the blame game, right? As opposed to her just really thinking that this was a move by Israel, right? You know, why wouldn't you think that this was a move by the establishment? Because when I think about it, like real shit, like I don't really look if I were to kind of create a conspiracy around Charlie Kirk's death, I really wouldn't be thinking Israel. I would be thinking the entire establishment because again, Charlie Kirk was a threat. And people was like, "Well, how was he a threat?" Charlie Kirk could influence elections, okay? Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point USA, was not only able to influence elections, you're talking about somebody who had direct connection to next generation voters and politicians as well. He had a lot of influence, and people may not believe me when I say this, but the more influence that you have, right, the more threatening you become to these establishments, right? Because now, as opposed to their propaganda machine being able to effectively sway the minds and the opinions of the populations, now you got this independent machine like a Turning Point USA who's able to do that. And again, let's just say that Israel, and I've said this before, United States and Israel, they are part of the second beast of the Bible, so they are in union. And any real Christian or at least believer of Abrahamic prophecy will understand, you know, that these nations are in union for a reason. They're never going to break up. The United States will never not enable Israel. Because again, if you're like somebody who believes in Bible prophecies, right? In these last days, there are only going to be two dominant nations making up that second beast. It is the United States and it is Israel. These are Satan's nations. Okay? You cannot tell me that the devil is not sitting in this nation. And, you know, a lot of people are like, well, what do you mean the devil's sitting in this nation? You know, I invite people when you have time to examine Daniel chapter 10, verse 13. And I'm going to give you some perspective, right? Because the word is the word and the word does not lie. Whether you understand the word and the deeper meanings of it or not, it doesn't lie, right? When you talk about, oh, this is satanic, this is that, like you got to understand what the external forces behind the human eye, beyond the human eye, beyond the fleshly sons, what is happening here. So Daniel chapter 10, verse 13, right? You know, if you're a believer, you know that Daniel, right? He was visited by an angel, right? It said, but the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me for 21 days. Then Michael, who one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there by the king of Persia, right? Now, a person reading this scripture will say, how can an angel of God be detained by a man? Because, you know, to the undiscerning eye, they read the scripture and they think that the king of Persia is a fleshly man. No, it's not. It is the fallen angel that it was assigned to the nation of Persia, who had power and authority over the nation of Persia. This nation is run by Satan. This nation is run by Satan, right? and then it talks about Michael. Michael came to help him. Who is Michael? Michael is an archangel, right? He's a chief angel, right? And we read about Michael again in Jude, right? We read about these angels, right? So he had to get saved by one of his homeboys, right? Michael, the chief angel. That tells you that the devil is running these nations, right? And in America, Satan sits in this nation. So if you ever wonder why we enable pedophilia, right? This is the devil's nation. That is a form of child sacrifice. And if you listen to some of these people who were actual survivors of child trafficking, right, they would tell you that they were lucky because there were a lot of children who were not able to make it out alive because obviously these Satanists, they are empowered by doing the most grotesque thing, defiled thing in the eyes of God. And that's violating the most precious thing in the eyes of God, which is children, right? These people are empowered by harming children. But off of that, right, I say this to say that, Candace is pissed off at Charlie's pastor because, you know, she wants him to be questioning Benjamin Netanyahu like she's questioning Benjamin Netanyahu instead of just questioning the whole damn establishment, even down to the Republican Party. Like, and I think that, you hate to point fingers, but if we're just talking conspiracies here, the Republican Party will have a greater interest, and we're just going through the history of political factions and stuff. Most of the heads of factions are taken out by one of their own, by somebody who wants to replace them, by somebody who wants to steal their spot, right? So, we could defer to Israel. She can defer specifically to Israel, but I would say she should be more so looking at the pro Israel faction in the Republican Party that might have been looking at Charlie Kirk as a threat because he was changing his position and because he had so much power and he was being open about his change in position, especially with his alignment with people like Tucker Carlson, right? Who is being narrated all kinds of ways in that little camp and faction, right? Tucker is a rogue, right? Tucker is pro Russia, right? So, I think that, she's being so specific about Benjamin Netanyahu. She's being so specific about Israel. She's pulling out the receipts. Israel offered him money. And it's like, who doesn't Israel offer money? If you wield power and influence, you going to get offered some money. Okay? And she has to accept the fact that Charlie Kirk did take the money once upon a time, even if he declined it maybe a second time. Allegedly, it seems as though he was taking money from a lot of big donors who were pro Israel, up until the point where he probably started second guessing his allegiance to his donors. He probably started second guessing all this money coming into his organization. He was probably loving that. He probably didn't understand what it meant that when you get in bed with certain big time donors, you are beholden to them. It's just like a company who has major stakeholders in their company that basically run the company by default of how much money they're putting into the company, right? The leadership at that company has to be beholden to their stakeholders. So if they're stakeholders, you got some passionate stakeholder that says, I want Bud Light to change their marketing strategy to target, trans women and men, right? And this stakeholder is giving, a lot of money. That's what's going to happen to the marketing. But on the flip side, sometimes listening to your stakeholder, you lose your demographic, right? You lose your audience, you lose your customers, right? So Charlie Kirk knew that it was a risk for him to go too hard on Israel because there was a large portion of Charlie Kirk's followers and demographics who are moving more into a moderate conservative stance. And this is all conspiracy. Again, if we're running on conspiracy with Candace here, there's a lot of people who are on that moderate conservative stance. And, I think that that was a threat to the establishment, the Republican establishment that has been always and historically pro Israel, because obviously they tie their allegiance to Israel to something being biblical, which is really nonsense. Um, but that's what their belief systems are, you know. So Candace is pissed off at his pastor. Let's finish hearing what she's saying.
He wrote, okay, what's his name?
This
Rob
this is what Charlie's pastor wrote to Candace.
McCoy. He wrote, Charlie Kirk was my friend and I was his pastor. I want to simply say this regarding Candace Owens. Charlie Kirk was a friend to Candace and never publicly spoke poorly of her, though he disagreed with her. He never operated nor entertained gossip or innuendo concerning Candace. My only comment I offer regarding Candace is this. I only wish at this tragic time of mourning, she would be the friend to Charlie Kirk that he was to her. He would never have treated Candace or her family in such a way had, God forbid, this tragedy been hers. A friend loves at all times, and he drops a biblical proverb. Now, let me say this, okay? I hope that Charlie would have been the sort of friend that I'm being. Okay? He would have never. Why? Why wouldn't Charlie Kirk have investigated if I had been killed?
Because your black ass is a means to an end on that Republican conservative side. Like, I can imagine if this really, that if the tables were turned and God forbid something like this had happened to Candace Owens. I don't personally believe that Charlie Kirk, I don't even believe that Tucker Carlson would be going as hard for her as she is going for them. I don't personally believe it, right? I don't. They can say that they're friends all day, but I think if something like this happened to Candace Owens versus Charlie Kirk, right? Charlie would be, probably sad, talk about, Candace, blah, 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 but he wouldn't be going Nancy Drew. He'd be like, it's sad. She was my friend. I hate that this happened to her. Rest in peace. He'd do all the formalities, right? But he would not be Nancy Drew super slooping, breaking down timelines and being obsessed with timelines. I don't even believe Tucker would be that deep in if this were Candace. She can believe that all she wants to.
And we
I
were being so
personally
obviously
don't.
lied to. I think you're wrong. I think you're wrong. I think Charlie was a real friend and he would not have dropped it. He would not have let it go. Least of all, because he was being emotionally manipulated by a guy who curiously kept his mouth shut when Bibi lied. You knew, if you were really his close friend and pastor, how he was feeling about Bibi Netanyahu. You knew, if you were his close friend and pastor, exactly the names of everybody who was intimidating him and how poorly they are misrepresenting the things that he believed. So why don't you focus on being more honest as a pastor and giving as much information as you can possibly provide so that we can continue this investigation if you can't do it?
So I think Candace is asking a bit much of the pastor personally, right? His job is to heal the family, right? Heal those who may be impacted by Charlie's unforeseen passing and tragic passing, right? I don't think that, Charlie Kirk being just so freshly gone, that the pastor's going to really focus on blaming Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't think that's on his radar or thoughts. I doubt it if the pastor even feels as passionately about anti-Israel sentiments as Candace Owens. So I don't think the pastor is wrong for saying, hey, you need to chill, because like I said, I get that she's hurt. I get that that was her friend, but time, place, and manner. And I think a lot of this stuff, like, and again, she's reacting real time, obviously, because the FBI came out so quickly with, hey guys, we found the guys, one and done. This is what, and there's a lot of things that are just kind of suspicious about that whole situation. And I said that when so-called Tyler Robinson was in that maroon shirt walking through that neighborhood, I said to myself, that may not be the same guy. Like I felt that it may not be the same guy. It's like my intuition felt told me that that may not be the guy in the maroon shirt may not be the same guy. It may be a decal of some sort that maybe favors Tyler Robinson. And I think the precision of that shot truly came from a professional. I don't feel like Tyler Robinson was that versed in, you know, I just, and then too, I'm looking at, this kid, you know, any young man, and this is not being homophobic or transphobic or anything like that, but any young man that is in love with somebody who is trans, he himself has some level of emotional imbalance that he's reconciling himself, right? And it just seemed like Tyler Robinson is way too cool, way too stable. He doesn't seem like and he could be a complete sociopath, but from what people who know him are saying, he didn't give sociopath, right? This kid is way too collected in the text messages exchanges, in my opinion. Um, to have just done something like that, and even just his manner of conversation, um, it seemed like somebody who was more disconnected from an action that they've done. It seems like somebody who knew about something that happened, but like they weren't the ones doing it. It just didn't seem like that in those text messages to me. But Tyler Robinson could have been the guy who did it. He could have been a kid who possibly got radicalized by some mindsets. Obviously he's dating a young man who's transitioning and living as a woman, so there's a whole psychology with that dynamic in itself. And when you think about that whole dynamic, he came from this MAGA Trump family, so they didn't agree with Tyler's lifestyle. Let's just say Tyler was the guy. There is nothing else to see here, and Tyler is the guy, right? And we're talking about motives, right? He didn't believe with Charlie Kirk's positions, right? And that's why he brought it upon himself, you know, to end his life. I still am just really having a hard time with believing that, this kid organized something like this by himself. That he was a lone ranger that planned this incident for, about a week, he said, and then he executed this plan with, precision outside of getting caught, right? A lot of weird stuff there, but again, people are coming up with all kinds of theories about, the who, the what, the whys of this. Again, Candace Owens, she's going off on pastors now who's telling her, hey, chill, right? And like I said, I pray for Candace Owens, and people that I talk to, we when we talk about Candace, we pray for her, because I think she gets really knee deep into the affairs of Satan, right? And that's not really what a Christian woman should be focused on. And I think that she's a mother, right? And so to me, sometimes, you're going against these volatile energies, these people that you say are dangerous, and they coordinate people's deaths and all kinds of stuff or whatever, and you are risking your life. you know you're risking the life of the mother of your children's mother. You're risking your life to go after these deep state cabals and expose all their little dirty satanic deeds. And, at the end of the day, like I said, the world is still going to turn. And because there's nothing new under the sun, these people are still going to be knee deep in their Satanism, regardless of Candace Owens, on the mic doing the things that she do. I think that what she does is, the work that she does is, I respect the commitment. Me as a mother, I would not be pursuing this type of commitment because I care about my kids. And I understand that this is Satan's world and the demons are going to demon, Satan is going to Satan, and all of their wicked human beings that want power and relevance in this world, they're going to have it. And they're going to be screwing other people. They're going to be harming people. And this is not a defeatist mindset. It's just that, I believe that, again, there's going to be judgment upon these nations. And that judgment is beyond me. It's like, I believe that, my God is going to say that it's enough. And we're going to see mass devastation on this earth, and rightfully so. So I pray for those who are cleaving to God's kingdom and the reform that our God, through our faith, is going to make on this earth. And it's not going to come through any man. It's not going to come from the deeds of man, at all. And that's just my thing. But getting back to Jimmy Kimmel, I just want to. This is my last point with this because the world is crazy. I want to go over what Jimmy Kimmel said that got him fired, and let's just dive into it. Was this a statement that was worth getting Jimmy Kimmel taken off the air or fired, regardless of what you think about Jimmy Kimmel, right? I don't watch Jimmy Kimmel. I never thought he was funny. I think a lot of these late night hosts are not funny. They're obnoxious and they try to conflate being obnoxious as being funny. But this is what Jimmy Kimmel said.
Kimmel Live will be preempted indefinitely. It follows comments the host made on his show on Monday in response to the shooting death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
ABC's announcement came.
So when upon hearing that Jimmy Kimmel was let go for making remarks about Charlie Kirk, I thought that he had said and did something much worse than this, right? I thought it was something like related to Charlie Kirk. But when you really listen to what Jimmy Kimmel said, right, he did not say anything derogatory about Charlie Kirk.
Really trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
ABC's announcement.
So Jimmy Kimmel is saying that, people on the right or the MAGA side, are, trying to get political brownie points, right, by trying to say that Tyler Robinson was this radicalized kid on the left and he wasn't one of ours, right? Because that's kind of the aha moment that some people who are kind of trolling that side of the aisle, they're like, it was one of your own, right? And when you think about one of your own, that can come in many contexts. It could be, it was your fellow white man that killed one of your fellow white men. Or it could mean this was MAGA on MAGA. But obviously it came to find out that the kid was disassociated with his family's views, right? So, but again, I'm listening to Jimmy Kimmel and
activist Charlie Kirk.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them. And
so he's talking about the characterization that MAGA is making towards the kid that killed Charlie Kirk. I really don't see where he was trolling, celebrating, or saying anything derogatory about Charlie Kirk. So can somebody explain to me why Jimmy Kimmel is getting backlash because he's really talking about the individuals associated with the party that followed Charlie Kirk, that he's talking about their reactions. So I'm confused about this one. And I'm really, really confused about this one because either, somebody is very, very sensitive, and maybe it's the fact that Jimmy Kimmel, he is an influencer as well, and as opposed to trying to create some type of calm or understanding post this tragedy, he's trying to further politicize it. And he himself was trying to get political brownie points by doing the whole MAGA wants us to be us, but it was really one of their own. I mean, again, I'm not going to say that that's appropriate, but they do that shit all the time. It doesn't even matter. So I don't understand why the man is fired. I really don't understand why Jimmy Kimmel is fired. And like I said, I don't have any political dog in any fight. I don't think he's funny. I don't watch him. I don't follow him. I'm not a fan. But I don't understand why this man is fired. I really don't. Like, I mean, you cannot be that sensitive where you're saying you can't understand what people are saying. This man didn't say nothing about Charlie Kirk outside of reacting to people who are reacting post his unfortunate demise. So he is fired for lying and inciting. What was he inciting in the statement, though?
And doing everything they can to score political points from it.
ABC's announcement came after
I don't see any inciting,
ABC
though.
Says Jimmy Kimmel Live will be preempted indefinitely. It follows comments the host made on his show on Monday in response to the shooting death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
ABC's
You say it doesn't surprise anyone that I don't understand it. Then why is your punk ass on my channel, on my live stream, ZC? If you don't feel like there's any value here, get your dumb ass off the channel. It's very simple. It doesn't surprise me that you are probably the epitome of your statement to me. But anyways, again, I don't see him inciting any political violence at all. When you're talking about when Charlie Kirk first died, the first thing the right did was point to left-leaning ideologies, that this was a leftist, political violence. That was all you heard when he first died was political violence, political violence. So they were doing the same thing that Jimmy Kimmel is doing now, doing the whole ideological finger pointing. So again, the double standards are real. The double standards are real. And to me, you got people out here, and again, I go back to when the liberals were in office and they had all of their weird ass little ideologies and all their little social engineering that they were trying to push onto society, right? And anybody that pushed back against all that bullshit, right, they were met with losing their jobs. They were met with losing their livelihoods, right? Because they didn't want to agree with those positions and even those accusations, all that white guilt, fragility, all that weird shit. Y'all remember 2020, right? Now flip the script and the conservatives are in power, right? And to me, they're doing the same thing. They're doing the same damn thing. They're like, you don't agree with our Jesus or God. You're not reacting the way that we want you to react. You deserve to be fired from your job. You deserve to lose your livelihood because you're talking about our base. I don't really agree with this. And from what I hear, Jimmy Kimmel is probably going to sue allegedly. And I hope he wins, right? I hope he wins because, again, I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. Right is right, wrong is wrong. And if we believe in freedom of speech, I don't understand why him having the freedom of speech to say what he said, which isn't inciting any violence. If anything, he's a comedian, so he's poking fun at political opposition, right? People could argue, well, it's too soon for him to poke fun at the political opposition, but he damn sure wasn't poking fun at Charlie Kirk at all. He was poking fun at maybe the people who followed Charlie Kirk, who were pointing fingers or maybe in denial about the identity of this shooter, right? But he wasn't degrading Charlie Kirk. He was not insulting Charlie Kirk. If anything, he was insulting the MAGA crowd. And again, these people are God, faith, family, freedom of speech. And yet, y'all got some of y'all people out here making it their mission to get other people fired about their freedom of speech. So y'all double talking demons. All of y'all. You just as big of a double talking demon as your liberal counterparts. So, anyways, and I don't care about the little name callings of probably some of the lowest value of people in society. I mean, like some of you racist people jumping in here, right? You know, your God is the devil, right? And you disguise the devil, your God, with the name Jesus. So I'm not paying attention to some of you hateful ass people. You're going to be destroyed with your father, the devil, anyways. But, anyways, let me know what you real believers who are not political lemmings think, right? You know, looking at these lemmings of the world today who claim that they're believers, right? How contradictory they are, full of double standards, right? Because the same thing they don't want to happen to them, they will turn around and do it to other people on another side, no problem. Cancel culture, they had a problem with the liberals doing that. And what the hell did the conservatives turn around and do? Engage in the same damn thing. So these, like I said, to the people who are truly intelligent, not these political idiot lemming people, the truly intelligent people, there is no side to be on. Put your faith in the Most High, keep your prayers up, right? And let these devils be busy with their deviling, right? Because again, the whole world is lying in the power of Satan, and a lot of these people are demonic ass people, God disguised as people of faith. So, anyways, love your neighbor as yourself. If you would not disrespect or abuse yourself, do not disrespect or abuse your neighbor. And people who are truly spiritual and true children of the Most High, maintain your political neutrality, because all you got to do is watch these demons and the people who follow them and how they operate, and you will know that your best bet is to keep your faith in the Most High and our King Yeshua. Amen. Anyways, have a good day, you guys. Any of my moderators, what's going on, Ghetto Planet? I see all the. I wasn't even paying attention to the chat. I just happened to look down, and I see all the, you know, ignorance that get burned by the sun, probably coming into my chat with all their, you know, emotions, you know. They always think somebody's a victim. It's crazy. You know, it's like people kill me when they try to antagonize other people. And then when they defend themselves, it's like, why are you being a victim? It's like, I'm not being a victim. I'm defending myself against your dumb ass. Why are you being a devil, Satan? You know, you are the devil's children. You know, trust and believe. I'm not victimized because I know my God got me. And he got anybody who think they gonna try me, right? Your day probably not gonna go well messing with me tomorrow. So there's that. And I ain't even cursing you, but you curse your own damn self being so damn evil. So anyways, you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Candace Owens, let me know if you guys are on Candace Owens, you know, investigations. You know, Candace, she's very, very firm that, Israel had something to do with Charlie's demise. I personally believe that it was the establishment, the U.S. and Israel establishment, that has something to do, possibly, if we're going the conspiracy route, with his demise. I don't believe that some college boy that was in love with some, trans, person is really the full brains behind the operation. And I think that even him just saying I didn't agree with his position and he was spewing hate and everything. When you really listen to Charlie Kirk, there was a lot of things that to me was rooted in white supremacist hate and white Christian nationalist hate, aka Zionist demonic hate. I mean, but again, Charlie probably understood where the crowd was too. There are people who want to hear people like Charlie Kirk say certain things to make themselves feel better, about their existence, about their reality, right? And, there's money to be made from everybody, right? And even those people, you know, are a crowd to tap into that can give somebody some money. So I do personally believe that Charlie Kirk's rhetoric and all his fact and truth telling was rooted in white superiority, personally, and I think that just because somebody dies doesn't mean that we can't reflect on that person for truly who they were and how we observed them, regardless of what other sentiments other people have because they cleaved on to his ideas of thinking. There was a lot of people that didn't. And they have a right to express how they feel about this person, just like the conservatives, when some liberal person dies or something and they're like good riddance and all that stuff. Let's not act like the conservatives have never reacted to things like this in just disgusting ways, right? They always want to have this moral high horse, but a lot of them are demonic ass people at their core, and they use their faith as some badge of credibility. It's disgusting. It's really disgusting. And I think if, like, I look at the Democratic Party as being over demonic minded people, but at least they put that shit out there, wear it on their sleeve. The conservative Republican, these nationalist so called people, these are demons, these are wolves in sheep's clothing. These are people that we read about in 2 Timothy 3:1-5, where it says these people have a form of godly devotion, but they prove false to its power because they got straight wickedness on their hearts, on their minds, and their reactions. These are not godly people. Do not let the conservatives make you think that they are a reflection of godly people, because they're not. They are not a reflection of God's people. I don't care what they say. A lot of these people wear God on their sleeves and the devil in their heart. So be careful of those types of people. And 2 Timothy 3:1-5 tells us to turn away from these disgusting people, having a form of godly devotion and proving false to its power. But anyway, shout out to Ghetto Planet. I will be going through my chat and scrubbing it from all of the devil's children, my friends. So don't worry, it will happen. And I didn't even read a lot of their comments because, obviously I don't care what devils think. But shout out to the people who have offered useful, ideas about the topics covered in this video. I know when you're talking about some of these conservative people, the outright devil comes out in the chat. So we are looking at the devil come out in the chat. And I time this shit too, because if I talk about liberals, right, I look at how many devils come in the chat. When I talk about conservatives, I look at how many devils come in the chat. Conservatives are some demonic ass people. You guys have a wonderful day. And again, love your neighbor as yourself. If you would not disrespect or abuse yourself, do not disrespect or abuse your neighbors. Bye.